Hello, everyone. I'm Kathy Lieblich with Pioneer Network, and I'd like to welcome you to our first Hot Topics Culture Change and Action webinar of 2017, Building the Foundation for a New Year, Using Language to Guide Your Culture Change Journey, presented by my colleague, Joan Devine, Pioneer Network's Director of Education. You'll be hearing more from Joan in the coming year as she assumes responsibility for planning and hosting the webinars in addition to our annual conference. All webinar attendees, except for the presenters, are muted to minimize the possibility of background noise. We're going to encourage your input through the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen during the webinar. Please also use the chat box for any questions for Joan that you think of during the presentation. After Joan's presentation, I'll be posing the questions to her on your behalf. You'll receive a link to the webinar recording and handouts after the webinar ends. So now a little more about Joan. In addition to being our Director of Education, Joan is a certified Eden educator and mentor and the owner and operator of JP Devine Consulting, whose mission is to support care partners on their journey to home. A registered nurse and former activity professional, Joan has over 30 years of experience in healthcare, having served in leadership positions in long-term and acute care settings. As an advocate for the culture change movement, Joan serves as a frequent speaker at state and national forums and serves as board president of MC5, which is the Missouri Coalition Celebrating Care Continuum Change. Joan's the author of the book, Word of the Week, Creating a Culture Change Dictionary, which will very soon be available in our store, and she is uniquely qualified to present this webinar today on language. Joan, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Kathy, and thank you all of you for taking the time to be a part of this conversation, which I hope we can make a little bit of a conversation. I know it's a little bit challenging on a webinar, but I do encourage you to, as we begin to explore and talk language, if you have comments, if you have thoughts, if you have words that you want to share, please do that, and Kathy will convey them to me, and I encourage Kathy to step in with a good comment anytime that it is needed. It's always challenging on this journey. The relationships are so much a part of it, and that's hard to do on a webinar, but we are going to make the best of it, and we'll make it work. So we'll go ahead and get started. So I want to start out just with going over what the objectives are, certainly to identify the influence that language has as we work to change the culture of aging. It truly is, I believe, a foundational component of this culture change journey because language, the words we use, can make such a significant difference in our work, in our lives, in our attitudes. Certainly we want to recognize some of those words that are currently used that impact or perpetuate an institutional culture, which is obviously what we are trying to move away from, and then to gain an understanding of what are some options for some new words that can be used to support a person-centered culture. So again, you know, not typically an interactive forum in a webinar, but we're going to do our best to make it that way. You know, the words that are used in long-term care communities have a significant effect, I believe, on the quality and the kind of care provided to the individuals who live there. Culture change involves the use of language that emphasizes the dignity of the individuals who live and work in that community. And culture change language needs to highlight personal choice, the community as a home, and the importance of every level of caregiving. So as we know, culture change is not a one-dimensional thing. It is multidimensional, multifaceted, and so our language is also multidimensional and multifaceted. Using that language that originated with that institutional medical model of long-term care really does depersonalize the individual receiving that care and perpetuates that hierarchy, that regiment method of long-term care that we have become accustomed to over the years, and which I am so pleased to say is not as embedded in our culture as it was certainly when I began my career in long-term care. So going back to just words themselves, you know, words, a unit of language. One or more spoken sound or their written representation that functions as a principal carrier of meaning. So what is it about words that make a difference for us. What does a word convey for us? And words convey many different things. They are how we express our feelings. They can elicit in others emotion or feeling. What I say to you, the words I say to you, and how I say those words can have a significant impact on our relationship. I certainly can draw anger. I can draw fear. I can evoke intimidation. On the other hand, I can invoke joy and meaning and respect and all those things through the words that I use and the way that I use those words. And certainly we know that particularly as for any of us, but particularly as we work with those individuals who are living with dementia, it can help stir memories. So it can really make a difference what we say, how we say, on the quality of life that we are able to provide to those that we have the privilege to be a part of their lives. So what is in a name? You know, we've all heard this phrase from our dear friend Bill Shakespeare, that which we call a rose by any other name would smell so sweet. So, you know, let's think, do we really believe that? So think about this for a moment. What do you think of when you hear the word rose? What kind of thoughts, what kind of emotions, what kind of memories are evoked when you hear the word rose? And I would venture to guess that if anybody wants to type, you're welcome to. And Kathy, if you see something typed, throw it out there. I would typically the kind of things that are heard when we hear the word rose are sweet smelling, romance, certainly Valentine's Day, soft petals, beautiful colors, sometimes some thorns on the stem. That with the beauty comes a little bit of not so beautiful things. But generally speaking, when we see that rose, it does evoke very positive things for us. But now if I were to tell you that this object that you're looking at, we're not going to call it a rose anymore. We're going to call it a thistle. So
Joan,
tell
I
me.
do have, excuse me, let me interrupt a second. I do have one comment from Joanne. She says she
Absolutely.
thinks of her grandma's garden.
Oh, that's a great memory. It's a great memory. So as you're thinking of your grandma's garden, now I'm telling you that this is a thistle. So the same beautiful thing that you've seen in your grandma's garden all these years that has evoked those feelings of romance and beautiful colors and sweet smells, it's a thistle from now on. And I would venture to guess that eventually that word thistle now, because you associate it with this beautiful object, will begin to take on a different meaning for you. And it will have a different meaning. So just what Bill told us, if I call it something different, it doesn't change the essence of what a rose is. Now, on the other hand, here's that thistle. That thistle is not exactly the most pleasant of plants. I stick myself with it. It does have a little bit of a pretty purple thing. Just like the rose has the thorn, the thistle has a little something to redeem itself. But it's typically not something that I look at very favorably. But if I were to tell you from now on, start calling that a rose, now eventually will that word rose begin to take on a different connotation, because now I will associate that word with something not so beautiful, not so positive. So that language, that word we use is very important, how we use the word. And when we define how to change our language is very, very important. So I want to share a picture with you here. You all see this lovely picture of this gentleman. And I would like you to take a moment and pop in the chat box, if you would, what do you call this? What is this gentleman wearing?
Nothing yet. Oops, here's something. Okay. Megan said clothing protector, exclamation point. Tanya said clothing protector. Joanne said an apron.
Ah.
Kathy said he is wearing a bib.
and
Wait,
that's
Eddie said bib.
Another bib.
Yeah.
Well, here I asked that. I always love to ask that question because I think this is a wonderful example of that we can change the language, but that doesn't change what it is. So I can call this a clothing protector. I can call it an extra large dinner napkin. I can call it whatever I want to call it. It is still a bib. Sometimes it is not. It's not the language that we're using. It is the practice, and the practice of using a bib is what many would say a relatively undignified practice. So I can change that word, but it doesn't change anything. And that being said, I recognize, and I think we all recognize on this journey, that doesn't mean we're saying, okay, you know, a bib is, you got to get rid of every bib in your community, because that's not the right way to do it. You have to give people choices and opportunities, but think about the practice. And we also know that we have institutionalized our elders very, very much, and so many of them ask for the bib, although most of us sitting in our homes probably are not waiting for the day that we get to wear a bib. So we need to really look at, as I change things, there are some things that changing the language can make a difference. There are other things that I need to be careful that I'm not putting lipstick on a pig, as they would say, that it's truly, if it truly is the practice that needs to evolve and change, then let's work to evolve and change the practice. If it is the language that will help us with that, then let us look and change the language as we evolve. So I just always like to share that one. So what is the language of culture change? What is this person-centered care language that we are always talking about? And a couple definitions. It is very simply language that acknowledges and respects long-term care residents as individuals. Exactly what we're looking for. If anything else on our person-centered journey, it is all about individualized care and services. So it's the way I speak to you has to recognize that individuality of who you are, and that is not just how I speak to my residents, it's how I speak to my peers, to my staff, how I speak to the public, because we know ageism is a huge issue in society at large. Here's another wonderful definition. This came from Karen Schaineman, who was at the time with CMS, and she said, over time, I've come to realize that much of the language we use is in need of replacement because it unintentionally demeans people, contributing to a hierarchical sense of us and them, or a dehumanizing institutional culture instead of a nurturing community with respect for its members. I think it's a wonderful definition that Karen gave us, and I think one of the things in this that is so very important for us to acknowledge and recognize and share with our teams is the comment she put about unintentionally demeans people. We have to recognize the fact that we're not horrible people because of the words we use, or in some cases the practices that we have practiced in our past. For those of us who are old enough to remember the days of tying people down, we weren't terrible people because we did that. We weren't horrible people because we developed this institutional model and this institutional language. We didn't mean it to be what we are now recognizing that it has been. So as Maya Angelou would tell us, I did the best with what I knew, and when I knew better, I did better. And so the language, like so many other things in this culture change journey, it's our responsibility, once we have acknowledged the fact that it is not what it should be, to support that person-centeredness and the culture that we want to have. It now becomes our responsibility to change it. And like so many other things in this journey, changing your language is not easy at all. In fact, it can be very, very difficult. So before we talk about the words themselves, I just want to briefly talk about the how, because, you know, the words are the what, but we all know on this culture change journey, it's not just about what you do. It's not just about the practice. It's about how you put that practice in place and your understanding of that practice. And that how is so very important if you're going to sustain. So just briefly, I'm going to talk a little bit about Elderspeak and what it is, because that plays into it. I can use all the right words, but if I use them the wrong way, I have not accomplished anything in support of my elders. So as we look at it, you know, Elderspeak, it's that infantilizing, excuse me, easy, not an easy word to say. It's infantilizing communication. It's that sweetie, that dearie, that honey pie, that sweetie, that grandma, that the terms that, you know, we have just casually used for so many years. But it does kind of convey a message of incompetence of the receiver, and certainly a dominance of us as the speaker. We are the experts in this relationship. We are the doers, they are the takers. And that's not what we want to convey, but that's certainly what is conveyed in so much of what we say when we use this type of elder speak. It assumes, again, that that elder is dependent and frail and weak and incompetent and childlike. And I don't know about the rest of you, but as I age, and I'm getting closer and closer to being one of those elders, as I age, I certainly don't want to be thought of as that. I may not do the same things I did at 20, but I'm certainly very capable of doing many, many things. And I want you to see me as someone who is capable, and I want you to see me that way until the day that I'm not here for you to see at all. The other thing it conveys is that speaker, again, has control. They are the power. They are the ones that are valued. They're the wise one. And we know, we've learned much of the wisdom in this world belongs to our elders. And they kind of carry the knowledge, and the elder does not. The other thing it conveys is that older adults equally suffer from memory problems, hearing problems, energy problems. We're just assuming that just because you're old, these are all the things that happen to you. It's those stereotypes, it's that ageism that we have. We all know of many, many elders. We know only about 4% of elders live in long-term care communities, so there's 96% of them that a good share of them are very, very capable up to the very end of their life. And they don't lose. It is not all about loss for them, and yet we make that assumption in so many cases, and that kind of breeds that elder speak. It's a patronizing language. It's when we kind of talk a little high-pitched, and I don't know about you, but that can be kind of annoying. We've all probably seen that when we walk in a room when there's someone old, I need to talk really loud to you, okay? We're not all deaf, and some of them have hearing aids, and that, that loud voice does more, and that actually distorts and actually makes it worse for them. The slow talking, I have to give you time. You're going to drive me nuts. And that's a very patronizing way to go about speaking. One that I think we see a lot is the one-sided conversation where the well-intentioned care provider goes in and just talks and talks and talks and answers their own questions without giving the elder the opportunity to be part of that conversation. And it, again, is generally well-intentioned, but very one-sided. And when you think yourself, you put yourself in those shoes of how do you feel when someone is in theory engaging you in conversation, but in reality not engaging you, not giving you an opportunity to be part of that conversation. Certainly we know this dear and the sweetie and those type of comments can be very, very demeaning for people to hear. Using a first name. You know, most of us, you earn a level of respect from people, and certainly for our elders, that's very true of the age and the culture that they grew up in, that you didn't just casually call someone by their first name, particularly a young adult, or someone that they would look on as almost as a child. You earn the right, you have earned the right through age to a little bit more respect. And I don't use that informality until I have been invited to use that informality. And then saying things like, it's time for our bath. You know, that's, I don't even know that we say that to our kids. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Why we use elder speak, again, it's not because we're terrible people. It's because tradition. We've always done it that way. That's what we learned. That's what we heard when we were in the nursing homes. It was obviously modeled by other people. We're just not thinking about it. I think that's a lot of it, is we just don't think. We don't put that two and two together of what that must feel like for someone on the other side of that conversation. Sometimes it is an intent to control. I'm in there to take charge of things. That's what I'm going to do. Sometimes it's insensitivity, and again, not necessarily intentional insensitivity, but sometimes, again, it's just been a part of who we've been and what we've always seen in our lives, and it just seems to be okay. The effects, according to the research, is that it's an implicit message of incompetence that begins to give that negative feedback loop for older persons. They react with decreased self-esteem, depression, withdrawal, the assumption of dependent behaviors. And we've all seen that resident who comes into our community and very quickly just kind of gives up. I'm happy to say I don't think we see it like we used to see it, but I certainly look back on my career and can think of many, many times when that's happened. And when that effect happens, the challenge is, what do we then why doesn't somebody say anything about it? And as I was thinking about this, preparing for this, I thought myself, how many times do any of us go into a restaurant or some other store or whatever, and the clerk or the waiter or the waitress, calls us honey, and how many times do they walk away from your table and you have that, really, what is she calling me honey for? But how many times do we say to her, ma'am, please don't call me honey, please don't call me dear? And typically, most people don't. And I think that's true for our elders too. So they just, it's the politeness in our society that we don't oftentimes confront those things. And for me to be called that by a waitress for an hour when I'm having a meal that I'm with her is very different, and certainly has a different effect than for that elder who is left listening to this type of conversation and being talked to in this way for possibly the rest of their lives. So, obviously we need to avoid this elder speak. Begin the conversations by asking an elder what they want to be called. And we'll talk about that over and over again as we talk about language and words. It's all individualized. Communicate preferences to the care team. Make sure everybody knows what is someone's preferred method of communication. How do they like to have things shared with them, including their name. Err on the side of formality. If I don't know what to call you, I call you Mrs. Jones. And then I ask you, can I call you Susan? Or I wait for that invitation. Respect the age and the senior status. And it's funny, as I was preparing this again, I find myself, I was sharing with Kathy that within the last couple of years, many of my nieces and nephews have begun just calling me Joan. And it bothers me a little bit because I feel like I'm Aunt Joan, and I've kind of earned the right to be Aunt Joan. And now, have I said anything to them that it bothers me? No. So I'm right back to where I said I was. But we do. If I can't help but feel that if I'm feeling that way, the generation that is the next generation from mine, who taught me that, who role model that, certainly must feel a part of that. So are we being respectful for it? Are we at least asking permission before we move to that less formality in our interactions with people? So that's enough about the how we say it. Let's get to the nitty-gritty of this and talk a little bit about words. Again, as we talk about these things, please jump in if you have any comments or thoughts. And I do want to start with a question for each of you, and that is, what do you and your fellow caregivers call the building, the place where you work and where your residents live? I'll give you just a minute to pop some answers in there for Kathy.
Okay.
So what do you call the building, the place where you work and your residents live?
I have one answer so far.
Okay.
Okay, got two now.
This is a test if I put you all to sleep.
We got a couple. See if we can get one or two more for a moment. Okay, well, here are the ones that I have gotten so far.
Okay.
We have gotten, Joanne said the center.
Okay.
And I've noticed that the American Healthcare Association and their state affiliates are now calling nursing home centers.
Mm-hmm.
So Tanya said they're multi-site. Some are called the home, some are called the care home.
Okay.
And they used to call themselves campuses.
Ah. Okay. Well, I have to say I'm very pleased that no one used the F word. And I'm pleased, before you jump to any conclusions on what the F word is, it's not necessarily what you might be thinking of, and it is facility. It's very interesting. This was actually spoken at an open microphone. The first time I heard it was at an open microphone at a CMS forum where someone got up and said, in our community, we are never allowed to use the F word, and there was a collective gasp. And she clarified and said, nope, the F word is facility. And I 100% agree, and I'm so glad that we are moving away from that, although I will have to say I hear it many, many more times than I wish I did. But when you think about a facility, a facility makes you think of a factory. My husband works for a manufacturing company. He works with facilities. I would like to believe that the people that I work with don't live in a facility. I don't want to live in that cold, institutional feeling place. So where do I want to live? I want to live in a community, in a home, in a care center, as you all said. Really, when we really get to where we want to be, I truly believe the word will be home, because that is the environment we all seek, is a true, honest to goodness home. And it's very interesting that over 30 years ago, when Oprah first came out, the language in Oprah is peppered with the word home-like, which, when we think about it, 30 years ago, that was a pretty revolutionary way to phrase it. Even though they still use facility a lot as an organization, but they really told us about home-like. But here's my challenge to you on the word home-like. It's not bad. It's a step in the right direction. But let's think of the word food. And would you like your food to be food, or would you like it to be food-like? And I don't know about you, but I kind of want the real thing. So I think the same thing bears true for home. I don't want my home to be home-like. I don't want you to pretend to make it my home. I want you to really and truly make it my home. And I truly believe our elders deserve that. And then when we look at that home, let's look at the spaces within that home. And we've in the past used, institutional words, the lobby, the day room. Instead, let's go back and why aren't we thinking about, again, what is this in my home? So why am I not using that same terminology that I would use in my home? I have a living room. I have a family room. Now, again, we go back to language, and the thing I need to be careful of with language is I can't just call it that if that's not truly the way it is designed and functioning. I need to work on both changing the language and the practices that are around it. So I need to truly create rooms that give me the feel of the living room. Because when we think about home, most people don't talk about the bricks and mortar of a home. They talk about the feelings and the emotions of a home. And that is what we're trying to create. And that's why you can have a home sometimes in a relatively institutional looking community. And sadly enough, you can have a facility in a very beautifully designed home-like environment, for lack of a better way to say it. Other words like the unit and the division. I don't have a unit in my home. I don't know about you. I have a floor, I have a space, and that's a tough one because that is really not a home setting. So, we know people have changed that to try to change the mindset of how we think about where people are, to take that institutional feel away from it. So we use terms like neighborhood or household, or I think those are probably the two biggest ones that I see people use. And it helps us to create a different feeling about what it is. I'm not thinking about that unit on a hospital, and it helps me think of you differently as someone who lives in a neighborhood instead of residing on a unit somewhere. This is one that happens to be a kind of a pet peeve of mine. Let's tour people around our house. First of all, the practice is kind of interesting because did I ask your permission, for someone to come and see your home? And or do I just assume it's okay for anybody to come and go in your home? Most of us in our own homes, we're kind of persnickety about, who can come and who can go and where they can come and go within our home. But in that institutional setting, we're pretty free about just touring somebody's home. Instead, are we visiting? A visit to someone's home is a much more personal way and a much more person-centered way to express that. And certainly when we look at environment, the fact that we talk about long-term care as an industry, again, I go back to my husband who works in manufacturing. He truly works in an industry where there are widgets and things and machines and assembly lines and all those other things. And I don't live in that world. I don't work in that world. I don't want to work in that world. I want to see where I am as a true profession, as something different. And I think that is a part of our language, that it changes how we feel. And changing how we feel can make a big difference in how we make others feel as we go forward. So that's kind of a little bit on the environment. Then we get to the people. So here's
Joan,
that
sorry.
big, yeah,
Sorry,
yes, I'm
Joan.
sorry.
Before
Mhm,
you say, just go out of the environment, there
mhm.
was a pertinent question, which might
Yes.
be one for everybody who's on the webinar, and that's from Tanya, who said, "What do people call their meeting rooms in their homes?"
That's a good question.
Yeah.
That's a good question. And I'll answer that by saying that's also one of those things that we may want to look at design. You know, you may have a den where it is a more formal setting. So a den might be a room that you would use. You may have a home office. And that's perfectly okay to have a home office. You also may have, one of the things, and this is you're getting some of my hot points here. One of the things I think is interesting is that, we have this room, this meeting room that we set up for everyone to come into, particularly our families at care planning time, and it's all sitting around a table. Why don't we just create a den or a family room and a comfortable setting for people to come and have a conversation instead of a room that is designed for a meeting? Because meetings have a tendency of setting up kind of a hierarchy within them, whereas a conversation brings out that true discussion that is what we're wanting to have. And as we look to the future and the new regulations with a more person-centered care planning process, that room and how you design that room and then what you call it um, can make a big difference. So I don't know if that answers the question. Did anybody else have any ideas or thoughts, Kathy?
No.
Okay, well, you got to hear my 2 cents on that one. How's that?
Yeah.
So
Great.
again, as I said, you can't disassociate the words from the practices. So I think you have to really think it through from both perspectives when you're thinking of your words. And so that, it kind of brings us to the people. The patient, I think that's the same thing. As a nurse, when I think of a patient, I think of someone who I have to take care of, someone who something is broken with, that there is something wrong with that person that I am there to help fix. And I don't know that that's a healthy way to look at those individuals who are living in our communities. A resident, on the other hand, is someone who resides in a location. I'm a resident of my community at large. I'm a resident in my neighborhood. So being a resident somewhere is about a home. It's about a location, and it doesn't have that same connotation to it. And I think you think about it, not only how you feel about the person that you use that term with, but how they feel. When I take on that patient mindset, I also see myself as someone who needs to be taken care of. And we know that in a person-centered world, one of the things we're trying to do is provide opportunities for both giving and receiving for our elders. So we don't want to create that. You are the receiver of care and I am the giver of care. It is working together to create that quality of life, the give and take. And so we look at resident, we look at elder. And I will tell you, I'm one of those people that when people first started using the word elder, and as Kathy said, I'm an Eden trainer and mentor, so I have been converted, but it wasn't a hard conversion when I really thought about it. When we think of the term elder, many times what we think of, we add the ly to the end of it, and we think of elderly. Elderly has very different connotations than the word elder. Elderly, I do think of debilitation. I do think of frailty. Um, in fact, here in the state of Missouri, we have a conference called the Frail Elderly Conference. Well, that's quite a message that we're sending to people about, the capabilities or the abilities of our elders. But an elder truly is someone who, by virtue of age, teaches us, provides wisdom to us, is still growing, as they say in the Live Oak Project, is still growing, still learning, still has potential, still has promise within them. That's who that elder is. And when we think in our society at large of the term elder, typically we think of that elder in a church, and they are the people who are revered. They are the people who are respected and who we go to when we are seeking wisdom. In Native American tribes, that was certainly the case with elders. So elder truly is a very neat word, and it's a very respectful word, but it may not be the right word for the individuals living in your community. And that's, again, where you take that person-centered approach to it. Is there is no right, there is no wrong. Asking people is always, always a good way to go about doing it. And sometimes allowing things to evolve. That people may choose a practice that we kind of think, I really wish you wouldn't want that right now. Keep talking it, keep working with it as new people come in, introduce new language, and let it evolve. Sometimes you can't put a square peg in a round hole, and sometimes we get frustrated because we try to do that. The other word that guest is a word that sometimes we're seeing people use in a short stay setting, because again, I want that short stay individual to not see themselves in that dependent mode that the word patient conveys. So that's why we might use a word like that. Here's one. Does this one just get everybody's goat? And I'm so glad to hear you rarely, rarely hear that. But here's the interesting thing about this word. If you stop and think about it, grammatically, it isn't even correct. The resident never was the feeder. We were the feeder. They were the feedee, if you want to say it that way. I don't know if that's good English or not. But what a condescending way of putting that. And certainly the practice that went with it years ago certainly supported that same condescension. But if you look up feeder in the dictionary, you see references to pigs and troughs and those kind of things. And my goodness gracious, though we didn't mean it that way, what a dehumanizing way. And sometimes, and this is a great example too of sometimes you don't replace a word with a word. There is no word to replace it. It's a person who needs assistance with dining. It's somebody who I'm helping to eat. I don't need to put a label on everybody and everything. And I think for some reason we had this kind of shorthand that it was easier if we just put a quick down and dirty label on things. And I think we need to think about that's truly not necessary. Again, that same thing, how many times have you heard Smith or room 241 or the fractured hip? It's Mrs. Smith. It's Mary if she's given me permission to call her Mary. It's whatever she would like it to be. Here's a great one for people, complainer. Again, how many times have you heard that we're changing the culture? And if we're wanting to bring everybody on board, we got to be careful about labeling people. That family member who came in and was under such great stress when mom was moving into our community, and she had some concerns, and probably very legitimate concerns, and even if not in our minds, certainly in hers. And all of a sudden, the first person who calls her a complainer, all of a sudden, it's like wildfire. And everybody in the community knows that Mrs. Jones's daughter is a complainer. Oh no, go running when she comes down the hall. We need to be careful. We don't let that influence our relationships and keep us from growing the kind of relationships we want to. So if she has concerns, that's fine. It's perfectly appropriate to have concerns. We all have concerns. Don't label her. Look at it in a broader sense. This is one that's another pet peeve of mine. I don't want to be somebody's assignment. That's very tasky. And we're trying to get away from that task-oriented way of thinking. Why can't I just be one of the residents that you're caring for? It's a few more words to say, but it speaks so much more personally to who I am as an individual. Here's another one. And this is not a bad word, caregivers, but this is one where there is perhaps a better word, and that better word would be care partners. And I think over the last couple of years, we've been hearing this more and more. Dr. Al Powers, who has done so much work with dementia care, is one of the first people that I heard use this term. And really the difference between caregivers and care partners is taking us back to that balance of giving and receiving. We are all care partners. We all have an opportunity to give. We all have an opportunity to receive. So whether I am a resident elder care partner, whether I'm an employee care partner, or I'm a family member care partner, we are all in this partnering together, and that partnership and that sense of partnership is what's going to help bring about those person-centered relationships and practices that we're looking to achieve. Now, as a nurse, I find this one interesting, charge nurse. And it connotates, and with all due respect to my fellow nurses, sometimes it connotates kind of that nurse ratchet from, what is that, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And that's not the relationship we want. It kind of goes along with, I don't think I have this in the PowerPoint, but it's like CNA, Certified Nurse Assistant. She's not my assistant. He's not my assistant. We're all there to care for the elder, for the resident. So, instead of seeing us as the charge nurse, what about a neighborhood nurse leader or a clinical guide, someone who's there to be part of our team and not, and if in a person-centered world we want to take away some of the hierarchy, we have to look at the titles that we use and the relationships that those titles tend to convey to us. And we need to start breaking some of those down too to change our practices. Again, that whole piece of assistant. We are not assistants. We do assist each other, but we're associates. It's not a hierarchy piece to it. This one, I just frontline staff, and this is a hard one. This is a hard one to find something different for. I find myself in it, but when I think of frontline, all I can picture in my head is that World War I movie with you got all the guys with the bazookas or machine guns or whatever, and they going down in the front line, and if they make it through the front line, then the rest of you can follow us, because we made it alive. So it's like we're going into battle every day. And oh my goodness, that isn't how we should be feeling. That is not what our life should be for both ourselves and for the residents that we care for. So, care team members or care companions or associates or whatever, whatever works in your community, but think about a word that really conveys more of the relationship that you want to have with your elders and between each other as you look at your language. That was the people. And then we go to the things we do. How many of you were admitted to your home when you first bought it? That's not something we did. We moved in to our home. It's a very different feeling, a very different process. And in fact, years ago, I saw a very, very startling presentation where they showed the comparison of an admission to a nursing home and an intake process to a prison. And oh my goodness, it was so incredibly close. So again, it's one of those things that we need to look at the wording we use, because being admitted to a nursing home is a very, very fear-evoking thing to say to someone. But moving into a new home, certainly we can't just change the terminology. We've got to look at the practice of what that means for our elders, for our residents in our communities. But we need to look at changing that. Same thing with the moving out. A discharge is a moving out. A discharge is something that I think of a discharge, and I don't have control in a discharge process. Even when I go to a hotel, they don't discharge me from the hotel. I check out of a hotel, and in that checkout process, I do have a little bit of say in it. Certainly that move out, I have say in what that is. So, you think of the subtleties of sometimes what those words mean, and we can change so much by changing those subtleties. Things like, I'm shipping you to the ER. Really? You sent me to the emergency room. And this one does evoke lots of different emotions. What do you say when somebody died? What terminology do you use? Expired is one that we see so often in the institutional setting, and it is one that just gets my goat. And so you get to hear all my biases. But here's my thinking on expired. I've thought too much about this, you can tell. If you can pay a fine when I die, if you can pay a fine and get me back, then you can say I expired. If you can't, don't use that term. Call it what it is. I died. I passed away. Whatever term you want to use. And what term do you use in your community? Ask your residents. Ask them what you want to be said and how you want them to deal with the entire scenario of when someone dies. It's a bigger question, because so many times it's not their fear, it's ours, that we don't even want to bring it up. But ask them what they'd like to be. And you're going to probably get one smart aleck in the crowd who's going to say, just tell them I kicked the bucket. It's okay. We need to have those conversations, and we need to get comfortable with death, because it's part of life. I love this one too. So when my grandkids come over, we're going to go out and we're going to ambulate. Well, I'm going to go I call my neighbor in the morning about our morning ambulation with my dog. We don't talk like that. We go for a walk. So why not, say to my resident, to my elder, let's go for a walk. It's time, you need to, instead of you need to ambulate Mrs. Jones 3 times today, you need to take Mrs. Jones for a walk down to the dining room 3 times today. Again, it's putting a more personal thought process into what it is. It's normalizing it, and normalizing it is such an important thing for us to do. Loading the van, seating people on the van. Elope. Now this is a hard one because from a risk management perspective, this gets a little bit tricky, but think about this. This is one for you to really explore. Is there another way to say that? Because eloping really has, the connotation of that you're escaping from something. Well, I hate to think of the fact that you feel like you have to escape from your home. Here's another one, toilet the resident. That's not what we say. That's not what in normal life we say. We help the resident to the bathroom. A toilet is not a verb. Toilet is a noun. And we've turned it into a verb. Allow. This is a very, very interesting word and one we really need to think a lot about. If I'm 85 years old and you're a 25-year-old CNA, really and truly, who are you to allow me to do anything? I have the right to do whatever I want. The regulations say I have the same rights as any other citizen in this country. So who are you to allow me to do anything? So we really need to think about the fact that it is not ours to give. We can encourage, we can support, we can welcome, we can help find ways for people. But I'm not giving you permission. I'm not allowing you to do things. I'm supporting your rights to do what you wish to do. More things that we do, med passes. I don't do a nightly med pass. I just take my meds. Schedule and routine. I think these are real interesting words to think about because when we think of schedules, that again takes us back to that task-oriented way. If we think of things in terms of schedules, if I think of things in routines, that's a little bit more relaxing way to look at things. And routines, are very similar in some cases to schedules. The difference, I think, between that schedule and that routine when we look at that terminology is typically that schedule is something that I, as the institution, look at this, what I'm saying here. I, as the care provider, I'm setting that schedule. That routine is something that evolves and develops based on the people that I'm working with. And that's what person-centeredness is all about. I'm going to have set things that happen within my day or within my week, even in a very person-centered environment. But it's going to be based on a routine, and it's how that routine came to be versus how that schedule was developed that is what makes it person-centered versus not person-centered. Same thing, thinking about performing tasks and making rounds on my residents. I don't make rounds at night to see if the kids are okay. I go in and I check on them. So why don't we just go check on our residents? I don't transport you to your soccer game. I give you a ride to your soccer game. I assist you to the soccer game. This one I heard in a meeting one time, and it just made the hair on my arm stand up. We serviced 25 residents this month. Wow, what'd you do? Change their oil? You don't service people. We provide care for them. We worked with 25 people, whatever it is that we're going to say, but thinking about using those very technical words just depersonalizes what it is we're trying to do. Another thing is we think about what we're doing, instead of doing for people all the time, let's think about doing with people. And then this one, this is just a huge one. And this is our society at large, I think, that shows us how much work we have left to do. As long as we continue to think about it as putting mom in the nursing home or finding a place to put dad, we're still in that institutional mind setting. We're still accepting something that is less than what we believe should be for our elders. It shouldn't be a matter of putting mom in a nursing home. It should be finding a new home for mom to live in. Until we truly believe that that's what we're doing, and until we can create the environments where that really is happening, we're not there yet, but it's what we're striving for. And I think that one just is a very, very telling comment and way to say things. I think the other thing that when we look at language is, when you hear people say we are doing culture change, if someone says they are doing culture change, then they probably aren't, because culture change is not something you do. Person-centered practices may be things that you do, that I incorporate that practice into my daily life. But my culture is something I change. It's something I become. It's something I believe in. It's something that provides the foundation. So the person-centered practices are the what. The culture change is the why and the how. And I don't do a why and a how. I embrace it. I live in it. I incorporate it into everything that's a part of my organization. It's part of who I am and how I approach life and how I approach my elders, how I approach each others in the organization, in the community that I am living and working in. So a very different thing and something really to I think kind of want to really think about and stew about a little bit. The other thing that we know is so very important in this culture change journey is that language can reflect that new style of leadership, because it is about a new style of leadership. It is about relationships. It's all about relationships. So do the words we use, and sometimes not even just verbally use them, but the way we think about things. Am I controlling? Or is it instead is my goal to facilitate and mentor and influence and guide? It's that hierarchy. In a hierarchy, I control. Am I the one with the power, or is my goal to empower other people? It's a subtlety, but it's a very, very meaningful subtlety. And do I empower people in the correct way? Do I see people as my subordinates? That I get to be, again, in charge and in control? Or do I see them as people, maybe, I'm not even sure followers is a good word, but followers or team members or peers or care partners? How am I seeing the people that I work with on a daily basis? Do I see them as equals? Do I see them as people who all come to the table with their own sets of talents and skills? Or do I see them as people that I have to kind of take charge of and be in control over? Discipline, this is, I think, another one of those that we really need to be careful that we don't just throw a new word in to an old practice. We all know, as we're looking at workforce redesign, that we need to have a kinder, gentler way of working with people to acknowledge the fact that we are human, and to work with people to do better and instead of just beating people down because they did something wrong. So instead of disciplining, are we looking at coaching and counseling and being careful that I don't just now change everything in my policy and procedure manual, that every time the word discipline is, I auto-correct and make it coaching, but I haven't changed the practice that's behind what it is that I'm doing. And this is just a great word. This one, I was doing this presentation several years ago and a woman from a VA home brought up to me, and she said, "That's the word that gets us in trouble. Let's." And she said, "Think about it." She said, "We have primarily a male population, so you had this gentleman who is living with dementia, who is a retired Marine, who sees himself very, very macho, and this young, cute CNA comes up to him and says, 'Jim, let's go take a bath. Let's go to bed.' And he gets frisky. And now all of a sudden he gets labeled as being inappropriate sexually. Well, all he was doing was responding to an invitation. So it was just one of those that you kind of went, wow, I hadn't thought about that. But man, what we say really does make a difference. And I just set that poor gentleman up. And I shouldn't be doing that, because it isn't let's. I'm not going to take a bath with you. I'm not going to bed with you. I'm going to help you to take a bath or to get ready for bed. And so lots of other words that we can look at, they versus we. It's not an us and them. Stop seeing everything as a problem. We need to see the challenges and the opportunities, and facilitating and guiding and influencing. And instead of finding fault with everything, we need to go back and find a reason. Here's a good QAPI, that root cause analysis instead of blame. What it is we're doing. Instead of always just planning everybody's day, can we provide a little inspiration so that people can be part of it themselves? Instead of being so worried about who takes credit for things, are we finding ways for our team, for our elders, to be able to get the credit for things that happen? Are we so concerned about that it's too big a change that I can't do it? Then think about it differently. What are some small changes that will help me to get to that big change? And instead of what's wrong, what's right? Instead of being right, just doing what is right. Instead of letting barriers stop you, let that vision guide you. And this one I just absolutely love, and that is react and versus respond. And there's a great way that was shared with me on how to explain this one. And as a nurse, it really hit home. But I think every one of us has taken medications in our life. And when you take a medication and you think about the reactions that you have to a medication, Those reactions are typically not good things. It's the rash, it's the dizziness, it's the headache, it's the fatigue, it's death, they tell us on all the TV commercials. Those are the reactions that I have to a medication. When I respond to a medication, my fever goes away, my headache goes away, the pain goes away, my blood pressure comes down. The responses are those positive things we want to see happen. So when we are working with our teams, when we are working with our elders, particularly an elder living with dementia, when we face a situation, instead of reacting to it, we need to learn to respond to it. And again, that's not just a word, that's a practice. But we want to be talking about how we respond to things in our world and not just how we react to things in our world. And then this is just a wonderful word, I think, that needs to kind of be changed. And that's the word no. It's such an easy answer because then it's done, it's over. Yes is so much better word. But here's the challenge to that. It's not an absolute yes. We don't live in a perfect world where I can always say yes to everything. It's a find a way to say yes. So what part of this can I make happen? What part of this can you take on and let it be yours? That resident who tells us he would like to jump out of an airplane, that's his dream. I may not be able to support that in an absolute yes, but maybe I can find a way. Maybe we can go out to the local airport where there's some paratroopers and you can talk to them, or they can come to see us in our community, or they can bring a parachute to folder. We can even just watch World War II movies with paratroopers. What can I do to help bring what it is that you're looking for to life? How can I find ways to say yes? And the same thing for our staff and everybody else that we work with. So that's just to me, that's such a powerful word, and it kind of the last word I want to leave you with. But whatever words you use, make your language conscious, make your language positive. Be affirmative, help people see the possibilities in what we are doing, and not just all the challenges, because we face challenges every day, but we've got it within us to face those challenges in a very positive way, and our language can help that. We all know gloomy Gus can bring us all down. We need to help gloomy Gus to learn some conscious language of being positive and bringing that back to our community. So I leave you with just one last question, and that is, how are you going to change the language and change the culture in your community? And I would challenge you to have fun with it. Make it a little bit of a game. I've worked in communities where, you pay everybody puts a nickel in or a quarter in every time you say a word that's not person-centered, and then I know a community that the DON said she personally bought the Wii machine for the residents because of how many times she said the wrong word, but she learned because the staff kind of caught her and kidded her and had fun with it. So, find ways to change that language in a fun way. Have a word of the week that you share with your team, or whatever it is, but start working on it and start being conscious of it, and know it's not necessarily going to be an easy thing to do. And there's resources for you. So, when you get these handouts, and I apologize, I did not give you the handouts ahead of time because I didn't want you to have all the answers. I wanted to kind of be able to think about it, but they're there for you now. And here's some great resources, some wonderful articles about language that you can use and share with your team. So that being said, Kathy, I will turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Joan. That was great. We have a question from Kathy, who asked if the caregivers or care partners are not native English speakers, how can they learn these skills? And also, how do they learn to talk slower?
Wow. I
Yeah.
wish I had an answer for that one.
Well, how they can learn the skills, what I had thought of was they may be able to learn them better than
Yeah,
native English speakers, because it could be, rather than when we're teaching them, or
yeah.
whoever's teaching them, teach them those words rather than the words that we traditionally use. So it was
Yeah,
just one
Kathy, I
thought
think
I had.
Yeah, Kathy, I think you're absolutely right. Learning is so much easier than relearning, unlearning and relearning. And that's the challenge for all the rest of us is we have grown accustomed to this language, which is very institutional. If you can bring them on board, I think there is no easy answer to that question, and
Right.
there are certainly people that are much more talented at this and more knowledgeable. But one of the things I would say is, as much as possible, if you can learn and teach through stories and examples of how that slowing down the language or made a difference, that they could see how that made a difference for a particular elder in a particular situation, bring it to life instead of just the theory of you need to talk slow because that's better. But here's what happened when someone really did talk slower and use these words, and this is how Mrs. Jones responded in a very positive way, and we were able to reach her in a much better way. So that would be my one recommendation is try to find examples and stories that you can use those in your teaching and sharing. So it's not
Mhm.
just what I'm saying is good, it's showing you how it really can make a difference.
Good suggestion. And then a comment that I think you'll really like when we were that came in when we were talking about meeting rooms. Tanya said some of their managers have started meeting family members in the residence room, and so the resident is hosting the conference, not the manager, and what it's done is change the balance of power, and it's been very
Wow.
powerful.
Way to go. Congratulations. Great job your team's doing.
Yeah, that's very cool. Let's see if there's anything else. Okay. No, don't have anything else. So we'll just, thanks again, Joan, and thanks everyone for your questions and comments. And we're just going to the next slide, which Joan just did, which is that before that, though, after this webinar ends, you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to the webinar recording, handouts, and evaluation for the webinar. So please, to end with the evaluation, please take a few minutes to complete it, as it'll help us in planning our future webinars. And speaking of future webinars, be sure to register for our next webinar if you haven't already, Building the Foundation for a New Year, the New Regulations, what they mean for the pioneers on their journey to culture change, which is going to be presented by Karen Schaineman, who is formerly with the Division of Nursing Homes at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services and is now a consultant, author, and trainer. So that should be a very helpful webinar for organizations as they look at meeting and hopefully exceeding the new regulations. Next slide, please. So our first 4 webinars this year are all focused on building the foundation for a new year, and their titles are listed here, the one we had today and the 3 that are coming up, and there are descriptions of each of those on our website. The next set of webinars after that, that will be presented monthly from May through August, will be called the At the Table webinar series, which will address the needs of the interdisciplinary team as they join together with residents and families as part of the team to develop and bring to life individual plans of care directed by the resident while at the same time supporting the organization's ability to meet the requirements of the revised federal nursing home regulations. And the final set of webinars of the year will be based on the most current trends and educational needs to best support you in your work. There are a number of options available to you that are listed on this slide, and some of you have taken advantage of the 12 webinar bundle or the 4 webinar bundle, and our price is lower this year than it was last year if you're going to just purchase one at a time. And if you're interested in any of those options, please send the 2 bundle options. Please send an email to info@pioneernetwork.net. Next slide, please. The webinars feed into our theme for this year's conference, Be the Future, Person-Directed Culture Change is Happening. Not sure what's happening here with the PowerPoint, but be a part of it. I hope you'll be able to join us at the conference that'll take place July 30th to August 2nd, 2017 at the Hyatt Regency O'Hare, where we will be celebrating the 20th anniversary of the first gathering of the pioneers and be looking toward the future as well. And please be sure to visit our website for information about the conference, webinars, the latest news about culture change, toolkits, and other culture change resources, and visit and like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter. Thank you all again for joining us today, and thanks again to Joan.